bringing attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Good evening, everyone. This is Andy Steele. Thanks once again for tuning in. The interview tonight is with Robert McCoy. He's the chairman of the board for AE911Truth. And in the interview tonight, he'll be talking about his own background in architecture, the controlled demolition evidence from his perspective, and, of course, about the future of AE911Truth, the direction we're headed in as an organization, and some of the cool, exciting things that we'll be pursuing. So stay tuned. I'll be playing that for you pretty soon. So obviously, the big news this week is Richard Gage's appearance on Washington Journal on August the 1st. This was at 9:15 Eastern Time. The host was Peter Slen, and Richard Gage was given 40 minutes to present the evidence to millions around the world. The article I'm about to read from is from AE911Truth.org, written by AE911Truth staff. C-SPAN interviews determined AE911Truth founder. And it starts off, it's the kind of rare opportunity that members of the 9/11 Truth movement wish would come more often. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth founder Richard Gage, AIA, was invited to bring the evidence for explosive demolition of the 3 World Trade Center towers to viewers of C-SPAN today on its morning program, Washington Journal. His 45-minute appearance, which can be viewed here by those who did not see it live, is enabling the 9/11 Truth message to reach a national television audience of millions. Gage explained to viewers that his organization, representing more than 2,200 architects and engineers, is focused on the science of the event and on calling for a new, independent investigation. He encouraged viewers to visit the AE911Truth.org website and watch the landmark video, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. And this is what Richard said. Every one of our C-SPAN viewers today should be calling their congressmen and senators and finding out why they're not investigating the worst act of mass murder in U.S. history and the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. This is an extraordinary and unacceptable situation. Host Peterson told viewers that Gage was brought in as a guest because Washington Journal had received so many calls in recent months asking its other guests to address the issue of how Building 7 fell on 9/11 when it was not hit by a plane. The invitation shows that the continuing efforts of 9/11 Truth activists to bring the issue to the attention of the public are not in vain. And that is so true, folks. And for anybody that doubts their own personal power, the power of people, to spread a message, to make things happen, behold, okay? We all have power, we all have a responsibility, and we need to take that responsibility, because this is just one little thing. Think of the mountains that we can move. The article continues. Slen reads excerpts from read excerpts from the frequently asked questions section of the National Institute of Standards and Technology website, which gave Gage the opportunity to explain how NIST fails to address the forensic evidence that AE911 Truth's building and technical experts have accumulated, including the symmetrical destruction of Building 7 at free fall acceleration, the explosions reported by first responders, the evidence of thermite in the dust, and the molten iron found in the rubble of all 3 towers. Gage also pointed out that at least 2 media outlets, CNN and the BBC, reported the destruction of Building 7 before it actually occurred. Several excellent questions were asked by Washington Journal callers, most of whom made intelligent points about the subject and had supportive comments about AE911 Truth. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and play excerpts for the interview. Obviously, the entire interview is available all over the place on the internet. Currently, as I record this introduction to tonight's show, C-SPAN's webpage in their archives, where Richard Gage is now forever immortalized, has spiked. His view rating right now, let me hit refresh on my computer, is at 52,264 views. This is just on Monday, the Monday following the Friday that he was on. So anybody that you want to see it, send them to the C-SPAN video. I'll have it linked up at 911freefall.com with this episode, so you can find it for easy access. The video is also being hosted on YouTube and mirrored on several different YouTube channels, as well as other video sites like Dailymotion. So it's going viral. It's going everywhere. And that is, of course, thanks to the great activists out there spreading it around, and also alternative media and even what I call mainstream internet media picking up on it and writing about it and including the video in their articles. So show it to as many people as you can. All right, I'm going to play those excerpts from the interview right now.
Now we want to introduce you to Richard Gage. He is the founder of a group called Architects and Engineers for 911Truth. Mr. Gage, what is that group?
We are a group of 2,200 architects and engineers, a nonprofit organization dedicated to finding out what really happened at the World Trade Center with the destruction of all 3 towers on that day.
And what do you have doubts about?
Well, the architects and engineers that I represent have found evidence that has not been told to the American people by the agencies tasked with explaining the destruction of these towers. Evidence of controlled demolition, particularly with the 3rd high-rise that collapsed on that day in the afternoon of 9/11, World Trade Center 7. We're looking forward to sharing with your viewers that evidence today.
Mr. Gage, that was Building 7, Dan Rather narrating on CBS Live.
It sure was, and most Americans are completely unfamiliar with this. In fact, architects and engineers around the world, mostly all unfamiliar with the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. I mean, here is a 47-story skyscraper. At 5:20 in the afternoon, it drops like a rock, and I mean this fast. Free fall acceleration, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, as you saw. Now, a building with 40,000 tons of structural steel cannot fall straight down like we saw due to normal office fires, the official reason given us by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, without all 80 columns on each floor being removed simultaneously and then synchronistically timed floor by floor. So, Peter, we've seen this like the old hotels in Las Vegas, and as our viewers just saw, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition. But NIST tells us, no, this came down due to normal office fires. So you can begin to see the problem right off the bat. Normal office fires have never brought down a skyscraper ever before. We have steel-framed, fire-proofed skyscrapers for a very good reason, and they have protected our towers for a long, long time. Yes.
You're talking about their report. Now, you question the falling of Building 7, the way it fell. Are you questioning how the Twin Towers fell as well?
4-ton perimeter wall sections, structural steel sections, laterally 60 miles an hour in every direction, landing 600 feet away. Isolated, freely flying structural steel sections. This takes an incredible lateral force, up to enough force to eject or fire a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. We also see explosions below that.
Mr. Gage, I apologize for interrupting. I just want to let our viewers know we're going to take a lot of phone calls, and we're going to begin that in just a second. We invited Mr. Gage on this program because from time to time, regular viewers of the Journal know that we get phone calls asking about Building 7, regardless of what segment we're talking about. And so we thought we'd investigate this group and give them a chance to have their say. Max in Milford, Indiana. Please go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, C-SPAN, for having Mr. Gage on to tell the inconvenient truth about 9/11, because our whole foreign policy and much of our domestic policies today are all based on 9/11. And there are so many questions to be asked and answered about 9/11.
Task, because I found that most Americans are unaware of the evidence. It's on the internet, it's available, it makes sense, it's comprised from the video testimony, the video documentation, the eyewitness testimony, and it's not something that's made up. We are talking about evidence that's capable of being brought into a court and standing up.
Good morning. This is Daniel Bland. I joined the Army 3 months after 9/11, a decision that nearly cost me my life when a rocket-propelled grenade impacted 15 meters behind me. So first off, I just want to say Mr. Gage and the 2,200 other architects and engineers that have signed this petition are heroes in my book. I'd also like to give a props to C-SPAN for bringing light to this important information. And I'd like to end with a question for Peter. Peter, it's apparent that you've been given these talking points from NIST, and you stated earlier you thought that their response was transparent, which to me seemed kind of a dance around the point Mr. Gage made about NIST refusing to release the input data used in their computer models. I would love to hear your comment and how you think that's transparent and how it serves the interest of truth and finding out what really happened, so that we can end these wars that are killing innocent people around the world to this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Close with this question from Boring File Clerk. It's tweeted in. I've asked it once and will ask it again. What is your theory about what happened, and why do you think it happened?
The scientific evidence shows that incendiaries, and in the case of the World Trade Center building 1 and 2, the Twin Towers, thermite and nanothermite and high-energy explosives, most likely, brought these towers down in an explosive controlled demolition. But our effort is to educate the American people so that they can be informed, they can demand a real investigation, and then we'll let the chips fall where they may. We don't have a conspiracy theory. We're bringing the evidence. It's up to others to investigate and find out who may or may not have been responsible.
So there you are, folks. Some great commentary from most of the viewers who called into that program that morning, including the soldier who pointed out that NIST is not being very transparent and not releasing its computer models, citing of course the threat to public safety that they perceive that would happen if they did that. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, and that doesn't serve the mission of truth and transparency. So great morning for 9/11 Truth, August 1st, 2014. Put it in the history books, but it's just the beginning, because we're going to keep on making strides. We're going to keep on making progress towards getting what we want. A real investigation into the biggest mass murder in U.S. history, into getting justice for the victims and their families, and for scientific reality, all right, for protecting the integrity of science, because the laws of physics don't just change because it's 9/11, because there's a political agenda attached to a particular event. We have to reclaim the truth and have the freedom to say that 2 + 2 = 4, not 5 because the government wants us to. All right, and so this is a great first step towards that, but ever onward. And now people should be galvanized, should know what their potential is, should know that they have power, they can make things happen, you can make things happen, you, the person listening to me right now. So don't hold yourself back, do whatever you can to help unearth the crime of the century and do something good for this world. Now, before I play my interview with Robert McCoy, I just want to draw attention to another article that's currently up at AE911Truth.org. We talk about the next step in the road to justice. This is going to be that next step. The article's titled, Coming September, Rethink 9/11 Billboard to Rock New York Times. There's going to be another billboard across the street from the New York Times building. Now, last year it was about WTC7. This year it's going to be about the Twin Towers. And speaking of C-SPAN, this billboard is going to reference a quote from David Sanger, who's the New York Times chief correspondent, that he made when he was on Washington Journal last December, when he was questioned about the destruction of the Twin Towers in Building 7 by a caller. And he said, "We've not found any evidence so far to suggest that the building collapses were caused by anything other than 2 airplanes." And of course, the answer to that is, you can't find something that you're not looking for. All right, if you're not looking for it, how can you find it? So the article starts off saying, "We at AE911 Truth are thrilled to announce the first of our 13th anniversary projects, the September 2014 New York Times billboard. With your support, this billboard, which features the explosive destruction of the North Tower, along with our rebuke to the New York Times chief correspondent David Sanger's jaw-dropping comments last year will stand directly outside the New York Times building throughout the month of September, including on the 13th anniversary of 9/11. Like us, you were probably flabbergasted when you heard Sanger say on C-SPAN, "We've not found any evidence so far to suggest that the building collapses were caused by anything other than 2 airplanes." The following day, more than 1,000 AE911Truth supporters contacted the Times and Sanger himself to say, "Clearly you haven't been looking." Now we are sending the message even more loudly with a billboard the newspaper's employees and the public cannot possibly ignore. Like last year, this 29 by 13 billboard standing across the street from the Times building and the Port Authority bus terminal will be seen by 100,000 people each day, with the image of the North Tower grabbing the eyes and the minds of everyone who has a clear sight line. This one is sure to get the attention we all know it deserves. And this is direct outreach. All right, it's going to have Mr. Sanger's name right on it. All right, and so this is holding our officials accountable. And when I talk about newspaper people, when I talk about people who are on the editorial staff of a major newspaper like the New York Times, I kind of look at them somewhat as officials, as opinion sculptors. People respect the New York Times for whatever reason, all right, because it has a large readership, has a large circulation. They reach a lot of people, so they have a lot of power to shape how people perceive reality. And this is why we need to keep on confronting these individuals, not just in government, but also in the media, all right, to bring our message to them. And we've proven that we can make a difference, as I said before. All right, now we need to do it with the New York Times. We need them to do a real story about the controlled demolition evidence, not the snotty-toned hit pieces that we've seen in the past that just completely dismisses the evidence and writes off anybody that talks about physics and common sense as being wacky or crazy or whatever, but a real investigative journalistic piece that covers the evidence, lays it out, and lets the reader decide for themselves whether or not it has any merit. That's all that we're asking for. And we need your help at AE911Truth.org, okay? So if you go to the article, you can look at the billboard. It's actually a very nice, colorful one, stands right out, and right there on the page, there's a orange Donate Now button. Deadline says Wednesday, August the 6th. I'm sure they'll still take donations after that day, but it says support our New York Times billboard campaign. It says think about it, at 100,000 people each day and a cost of $1,000 per day, each dollar you donate will reach 100 people. With a modest donation of $10, you will personally reach 1,000 people. With $25, you'll reach 2,500 people, and with $50, you'll reach 5,000, and so on. So it's quite simply the easiest thing you can do to support AE911Truth and reach all of those people in New York City, and even more importantly, the people at the New York Times, because they need to be reminded of their failure every day. They need to be reminded of the fact that they're dropping the ball. They need to be reminded of the reality that they're looking away from. All right, so anything that you can do to help out, go to AE911Truth.org, check out the article, check out the billboard that's being planned, and do whatever you can, whether it's volunteering, donating, however you can get your power out to the people at AE911Truth. They are working hard. They need your help. All right, before I play my interview with Robert McCoy, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all of the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. And that is 10 seconds.
Robert Robert McCoy graduated from the University of California, Berkeley. He got a Bachelor of Architecture in 1963. He was a member of the Southern California chapter of AIA, and he's been a member of other architectural groups. He's designed a number of high-rise office buildings in California. Now he's the chairman of the board for architects and engineers for 911Truth. Robert, welcome to 911 Freefall.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
It is an honor to have you on. I've been trying to get you on for a long time. Tell us about your background, what your career was like, and what made you the man you are today.
Well, primarily my professional background has been large, multi-story, tall buildings, large buildings, public, semi-public buildings. I've got probably a half a dozen high-rise buildings standing in San Francisco, and they include office buildings, hospital, 11-story hospital, and things of that nature. In Southern California, one of the largest buildings I have is the Tom Bradley International Terminal at LAX, about 1 million square feet. It was built for the 1984 Olympics. Along the way, I have done laboratory buildings, a lot of transit projects, hospitals, some school work, and the various and sundry other things that most architects wind up doing. House here or there, and a few decks, and some fun stuff. So that's what my background has been.
Very neat. So basically, when I look at the pictures of San Francisco now, I'm going to be wondering if that's something that you designed. So you bring a great professional background to the organization and to this issue. So tell us about yourself in 9/11. How did you wake up to the controlled demolition evidence? What made you start speaking out about it?
Well, I watched it like everyone else unfold on television on that fateful day, and it didn't add up. The next morning I had breakfast with a gentleman who at the time was head of Tishman Construction West, and we pondered the question and didn't really come to an answer that was satisfactory to either one of us. We just assumed that there was sufficient jet fuel to have spilled into the buildings and run down the elevator shafts and turned them into somewhat of a chimney. But we didn't give any real thought to it other than that. No real serious discussion, as we were both very busy and, like everybody else, had to go on with our business lives. Several years later, a friend sent me a video of the buildings and asked me what I thought. And the video was Building 7 coming down, and also it included a lot of footage of watching the towers 1 and 2 also fall. I wasn't anywhere near as busy as I had been in the past, and so I spent some time that day searching the internet for what I could find on those buildings. And I played the videos over and over again. As I did, a lot of my early background with some of these high-rise buildings began to come back, and I recalled I had correspondence with Yamasaki's office when they were designing buildings 1 and 2. I was doing headquarters for Pacific Gas and Electric Company in San Francisco at the time, and we had the same concerns. As a tall building standing out on the edge of town, we were vulnerable to aircraft. So they explained how they intended with their skin and the structure of their skin, they would shred the plane when it came in, and they would accept some damage, but that the building itself, because of the strength of the core and the nature of that Varandale truss that's on the exterior of their building, the building would stand and it would not be a catastrophe. It would be in the impact zone, but not beyond that. And as I thought about it and watched those buildings in the videos, that's exactly what happened. The planes impacted buildings 1 and 2. And they were literally shredded. And the fireball stayed pretty much to the outside. A little bit the fuel went into the buildings and ran across the floors, I'm sure. But the planes would not enter a single floor. The planes themselves are taller than the floor-to-floor height. So you have not only that exterior steel column grid that's 3'4" on centers shredding the plane, but you've got the floors themselves, which are about 12 foot floor-to-floor. And those floors would slice the plane. So the planes were sliced and diced as they entered the building. The only thing that would have passed through would have been landing gear, shafts, the engine shafts, and very large, heavy elements. The rest of them would have been stopped and shredded. Very little of anything would have gone through. Some would, but not much. And it was from there that I began to get much more curious about what actually happened. And in my exploring the internet on the subject, I came across Architects and Engineers for 911Truth and read their petition and signed it. And that's how I got involved.
Well, it's funny because you're talking about you're in communication with the people who were making the buildings that we now talk about every week on the show. And years after 9/11, I hear people say, well, nobody actually took into account that an airplane crash into it. And these aren't really knowledge people saying that. This is just what people assume because they've been kind of given that story by the media, that this was just some unexpected event, something that we never saw coming. But that's not true. I read an article from the day of 9/11, written from one of those British newspapers, might have been the London Guardian, I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head. But it was an article that ended with a paragraph stating that visitors to the World Trade Center would have looked at a plaque saying, essentially, don't worry about a plane crashing into this building because it's been designed to withstand that. And so obviously this was on people's minds. It was on their minds as it was being constructed, as you relay here from your own eyewitness testimony from those days as this building was being put up. Because you were part of that historical event, maybe not in the design of the building, but you were in communication with the people who were designing this building. So I want our listeners to take note of that. Also, too, you say that you questioned it. When did you become convinced it was a controlled demolition? What did you consider to be the most convincing evidence to you?
As I say, I spent that day, the first day actually, I spent a fair amount of time, and I watched a lot of the videos, and I did a fair amount of reading at that time as well, everything I could come across. And as I looked at them, I said, and knowing how these buildings are built and put together, I said, they didn't come down by fires. They didn't come down by airplanes crashing into them. Those buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. And when I had come to that conclusion before I found the AE911Truth website, and that only confirmed my prior conclusions.
Well, and something else I want to draw attention to, when you were talking about your story, your 9/11 story, and you spoke with somebody the day after the event happened, and you guys kind of came up with some hypothesis, mixed into it was kind of what the TV was telling you. And it's one of those things where if somebody, it's kind of gruesome, but if you were told that somebody had sawed their own head off by all these official people, police and media, I guess people might come up with some scenarios in which that might be conceivable, might be theoretically possible, but what's the most probable explanation? And this goes to show that engineers, architects all over the country were under tremendous pressure, if even just personal pressure, even if they're not involved with the investigation of what happened to the buildings. They've got their own lives, their own projects going on. They're under personal pressure, at least, to justify what they saw, even though it's not justifiable unless you take into account explosives being in the building. And this happened all over our world. And this still happens with people who haven't looked at the evidence, as Richard Gage cited when he was on C-SPAN. A lot of people, when they actually look at the evidence, they go from just having an opinion to agreeing with the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. A lot of the professional people I'm talking about, architects and engineers, and a lot of them go on and sign the petition. So I think your story perfectly illustrates that. Now, you're a board member for AE911Truth. You're actually the chairman of the board. So tell our audience, what is that like? What kind of work does that entail?
Well, when I joined the board a couple of years ago, they had been going through a number of shall we say, transitions, and there was a little bit of disarray in the organization. Not a lot, but it had grown considerably from when Richard first started it. What I've been doing since I've been on the board is since we are now well beyond an organization that one man can run by the seat of their pants, we've been putting into place systems and protocols and dividing up of responsibilities so that we operate much more efficiently. And that's been the thrust, a pretty extensive thrust for the last 6 or 7 or 8 months now. And we're getting there. We're getting to the point where we operate a lot more efficiently, a lot more effectively, a lot less wasted motion, and we hope better able to serve our message, deliver our message to people, and to now begin to take on some more challenging roles of mounting some legal claims against NIST and others who are just patently lying.
Right, and that was actually discussed in the C-SPAN interview with Richard, too. And we've discussed a small group of researchers who discovered the issues with the omissions in the Building 7 report by NIST. Tony Zambodi, Jerry B., that group right there, and they've pursued legal steps with Dr. William Pepper. So, NIST is getting it from all angles, and I don't think that they're going to be able to hide from this much longer. They're going to have to address the problems with their report. Now, I'm curious, from your view as a board member for AE911Truth, but also just as somebody who knows about this issue, who's followed this movement for a number of years, where do you think the 9/11 Truth movement in general has fallen short, and then where do you see it? What do you see it as having most accomplished in all of its years of existence?
And it's one of the problems of the whole movement that there are more people out there than you can imagine trying, for one reason or another, to discredit anything that is said regarding the controlled demolition or any other theory, for that matter, that detracts from the official story. And that's been surprising to me, that it's been so pervasive. The issue has to stand on its merits, and an investigation, a true investigation, really needs to be done. We've developed enough scientific evidence that cannot be refuted, indicating the presence of the very sophisticated explosives. Who put them there, I have no idea, and we don't go there.
I like what you said there about how we don't point fingers at a particular party. Even though everybody's got their personal opinions, very educated opinions in many cases, as an organization, we don't do that. I want to hear from your perspective. Why is it important that architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth not point fingers at any particular party?
Well, we're all professionals. We're all licensed to practice. We're entrusted with the public's developing buildings for the public safety, and we're not in the business of prosecuting anyone or investigating crimes. our business is designing and building safe buildings. One of the issues that doesn't get mentioned very often, and it touches on this, and that is that if those buildings in fact collapsed the way that we have been told, any of those 3 buildings, or actually any of the 7 buildings, because virtually all 7 of the World Trade Center buildings were demolished, or almost totally demolished. If a tall building, let's take Building 7 for instance, were susceptible to ordinary fires, so susceptible as to have collapsed the way that building did, then no tall building is safe. And you wouldn't go in one. And we know that's not the case. We know that tall buildings have burned for hours and hours and hours and burned very hot, much hotter than the fires that were generated on 9/11. The temperatures measured of the fires on 9/11. So we know that's not the case. But yet, it's presented to the public that ordinary office fires caused the entire building to collapse. That's just not possible, if you think about it. Building 7, for instance, was intact, subject to some minor damage on one side from the debris from buildings 1 and 2. But the steel was in place, the fireproofing was in place, and the fires were nowhere near hot enough to have softened the steel, even if the fireproofing wasn't there. So how do those buildings come down? What brought them down? And when you begin to look at all of the different elements, different ways in which they can be brought down, you have to come to the conclusion that they were brought down by controlled demolition. And then when we find the evidence of very sophisticated explosives in the debris and the dust, then we have not just a smoking gun, but we have a real forensic evidence of how they were brought down.
Now, you talked about sitting with another professional, building professional, the day after September 11th and trying to work out some hypothesis on what might have happened to bring the building down. Obviously, I would just guess this must come up when you're talking amongst your peers, whenever you see them. What are those discussions like? I mean, don't share anything that's supposed to be private, but to the extent that you can, how do those discussions sound when you talk to other people in your professional peer group about this topic?
Well, let me go back to that gentleman I had breakfast with that next morning. He actually was the project manager for the construction of one of the buildings in the World Trade Center. I don't remember whether it was 4 or 7, and I haven't talked to him in years. But he was aghast, and so was I, that those buildings had come down the way they had. And we were grasping at straws, trying to, as we discussed it that morning. It had never entered our minds that someone would have loaded those buildings with explosives while they were occupied. That never crossed our minds. It wasn't until later that entered the picture, when you begin to really analyze and think about what you were seeing when those buildings came down, that you began to realize that it had to have been explosives. Most of the professionals I've talked to over the years really are not informed. They put it out of their minds and moved on, and they don't have the time or the energy, just as I did not have the time or the energy to look into it for a number of years after the event. It wasn't until I retired that I had the time and began to reflect on what we were watching in those buildings, what happened. So I would say most architects really are or just have never given it any thought. When we do discuss it, by and large, they all agree, yes, that sounds like the right way, like what happened. But they're all busy, and they don't take the time to pursue it any further. They don't have the time.
That scares me as an American and as a person when people dismiss their responsibility. And I'm not saying that you need to work 24/7 for 9/11 Truth. I understand that people have jobs, they have families, they have things that they need to deal with. But when people just kind of dismiss it or say, yeah, maybe, but I don't want to think about it anymore. They're not concerned about it, especially professionals. And I always hold out this. I mean, some architect out there who neither you or me know could design a building, and maybe whoever perpetrated this crime, whoever was involved with putting explosives in the towers, could try to do this again. Maybe they would pull off the same kind of event, thinking they could get away with it again. And if their building came down, they would be looking at that architect and questioning, why didn't you take into account this plane hitting it or whatever event they blame it on. Okay? And he would be saying, well, I did. Okay, so now it would come back to haunt him. So building professionals everywhere absolutely need to be concerned about this because the integrity of their profession is at stake. The integrity of the science that goes into their profession is at stake. And it just can't be left up to the whim of loudmouths in the media who dismiss people like yourself who talk about physics in reality, physics and common sense. Okay, so the integrity of building professionals is at stake here with this issue. This is why every single one of them needs to sign that petition at AE911Truth.org, get their name on it, and demand a real investigation into, as Richard Gage says in the C-SPAN interview, the third worst structural failure in modern history, especially with Building 7, which wasn't even hit by an airplane, because the destruction of that building makes no sense unless you take into account the most obvious explanation, which is controlled demolition. Now, I want to get your take on the C-SPAN interview this week with Richard Gage. We've been allowed to talk about the evidence for a significant amount of time on a major network now. What should our supporters be doing to capitalize on that exposure? So I want to know first just your take on the interview itself, and then where do we go now as supporters of AE911 Truth now that we've reached so many people?
Well, actually, I think Richard did an excellent job. He was at the top of his game when he did that interview the other day. He looked relaxed and was in full control and was not flustered. I liked that. He did quite well. And by the number of hits that you mentioned to me earlier, or shall we say views that interview has had on just the C-SPAN channel is remarkable. What we need to do is to build on that and see if we can't get onto some of the other channels as well in the mainstream media. It's been an uphill battle for us to get anybody to listen to us in the mainstream media. We now have at least a toehold, and it's incumbent upon us to build upon that toehold to see if we can spread the word even farther. C-SPAN is not the most watched channel in the world, but if we were to get Fox News or any of the other news networks, CNBC, any of them, to even Al Jazeera, to pick it up and carry it forward, or Al Jazeera or Russia Today for that matter, and carry it forward, the more exposure we can get in what we refer to as the mainstream media, the better chance we have of reaching a wider audience and educating more people, and bringing them into the fold, if you will, in asking for a new impartial and scientific investigation. By the way, I don't want to imply that from what I said earlier, that when I talk to others in the field about this, others in the profession, by and large, after I've talked to them, they've all gone and signed our petition. So they just weren't aware before.
Right, and then Richard mentions that in the interview, and that's basically the case. A lot of people are just not aware of this. Even building professionals aren't even aware Building 7 existed. They don't even know what you're talking about when you bring it up to them. Most people are just fixated on the Twin Towers because that was what was replayed for everybody after 9/11, and you know, obviously the buildings collapsed on TV, or they didn't collapse; they were brought down in explosive-controlled demolition. And then most people were in such shock and awe by 5:20 that morning that a lot of them were just talking about what they had seen and weren't even paying attention to Building 7. They were told nobody was in that building, and it was just falling down, and you know, they were just still freaked out. And at that point, we didn't even know if the event was over at that point. But everybody missed it for the most part, and so they think they know what happened with the Twin Towers because they were told that. And as you pointed out in your story, a lot of building professionals were left struggling trying to come up with a quote-unquote rational explanation. And rational explanation was defined as nothing that would involve pre-planted explosives, because then that would really call into question what we were being told. So what can our supporters do? You say that we need to get on more shows, need to get more exposure. What things that people listening to this broadcast right now can do to help us in achieving that?
Well, they can pay attention to the shows, the various shows that have call-in segments, various networks that have shows with call-in segments, and when given the appropriate opportunity, they should call in and ask pertinent questions about of any person being interviewed or of any commentator with about what they're saying. There was a rant fairly recently on CNN, I think it was, where one of the hosts went off on a rant, just totally off the wall, and made serious accusations about our integrity. Well, we are challenging that, but that's not the answer. That's only one issue, and it's a minor issue. And what we need to do is to have the general population, the people who are listening, their listeners, their audience, call them with questions when somebody does something like that, or when somebody is talking about the issues of 9/11 or what's resulted from the events of 9/11, to put it back in there on the table. Put the question back on the table as to what it is that we really need to know, and what we really need to know is how those buildings came down. And after we know that, then it's somebody else's job to find out who did it. But until we get to that point, till we get to the point of finding out exactly how it was done, all we're going to get is smoke and mirrors.
Right, and I think this shows just how powerful people really are, how much potential each and every single one of us right here in the listening audience has to making stuff happen. I mean, you know, people often think, oh, I can't do anything, I'm just a small person, I can't make a change in the world, and I have no power. Well, if that were really true, the system, the establishment, whatever it is that we're up against here, whatever it was that is participating in the cover-up of this evidence, wouldn't be working so hard to propagandize you. All right, the fact that they work so hard to keep this buried shows that you have a lot of power. It shows that they need to go to extraordinary lengths to keep everybody asleep, because they don't want you to wake up. They don't want you to know what your potential is. And it can be something as simple as making a phone call and thanking a radio network that interviews Richard Gage or any of the other experts that are featured in 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, talking about this topic. It could be letters to the editor, to your local newspaper, and if they don't print it, calling them out for it, asking them why. It could be calling up your local news when Richard Gage comes to speak at some event in your town. It could be calling up your favorite cable TV show. I mean, Rachel Maddow last year ran a hit piece against us. You don't get to talk to her personally when you call them, but there is somebody at all of these networks taking tallies, taking note of what their viewers are saying. And I guarantee now with C-SPAN's ratings on those videos, the view count boosts up, they're taking note of that. Now, whatever they do with that, how that affects their future decisions, I don't know. That's up to them. But somebody's taking note of the fact that Richard Gage is getting a ton of views on the C-SPAN video library. And so, again, you have a lot of power out there. You can do a lot of stuff. You just have to free yourself from this myth that you can do nothing, because it's really an abdication of your responsibility. And even a little bit goes a long way. Again, you don't have to dedicate your whole life 24/7 to 911Truth, but you should do something, especially if you have kids. I mean, having kids is no excuse. I understand people are busy, but you can still make a phone call. You can still write a letter to somebody when you get a moment, even if it's something small, okay? And if you have kids, you should be concerned about this issue. Now, Robert, as a movement, in terms of outreach, in your view, how much concentration should we have on government outreach, like the politicians, congressmen, versus just general public outreach? Do you think that one is more important than the other? Where should people be putting their focus?
Well, you had not mentioned the politicians before and I was going to bring it up. I found that a one-on-one personal discussion with people works quite well, especially when you're dealing with a politician. If any of your followers or listeners knows politicians personally, has an opportunity to have an exchange with them at an event where they have a chance to talk, or at a dinner, or wherever, and can use that opportunity to expose the politician to what it is that we're about and what we know, and get in their hands say the DVD of experts speak out. That goes a long ways. That will go farther than any blanket kind of advertising or promotional or mailings or anything of that nature that we can do, because that gets the information directly in the hands of the person who has to listen to his electorate to get elected again. And that's the best way to reach the politicians.
That's right. I mean, somebody that knows a congressman personally and may even be a donor to that person who's awake to this evidence, and somebody who may have some influence even though they're not running for office, so they're a little bit more free to speak their mind. They have more power than I do right now. I can't get into that congressman's ear the way that somebody who's a friend or a donor to the campaign, major donor to the campaign, can do. And so this is the time to shake off that fear of what your social circle may say about you, and just say, hey, look, can you sit down with me tonight at this cocktail party in this back room and watch this 33-minute version of Blueprint for Truth that's on AE's webpage? Tell me what you think. Give me a response. Look, you should take this into consideration. And you don't have to put them on the spot. You don't have to say, you need to come out for 911Truth the first day of your term. You don't have to do that, but they should be aware of it. They should take that into account when they're considering future decisions in that office. And that's another goal of 911Truth and my outlook, that we prevent other 9/11s from happening. We also influence the future, because if the decision makers are aware of this, they'll look at other things. They'll look at legislation in the post-9/11 world a lot differently when the premise of some of this legislation is in question. So you have a lot of power out there, especially if you know people in government who are the movers and shakers. Chances are they're not going to listen to this broadcast, but they may listen to you. Now, what kind of things do you see AE moving towards in the future? I mean, what kind of outreach activities should we be doing? Should we be moving towards? What are some techniques that we're going to be implementing?
Well, we're going to continue doing the things that have been successful for us in the past. We have a billboard lined up to face the New York Times editorial offices again this September. We're just today began fundraising for that, and those things are expensive, and so we'll need whatever support we can get for that billboard. And we will continue to do that. We will continue to do the tours the speaking tours that Richard did this last spring on a swing through Canada. Those things have been quite successful for us. We'll continue to attend professional conventions where we're able to speak directly to architects and engineers and others in the building industry so that we can enlist their help and their support. Each time we do, we gain a lot of new signers to the petitions, and we gain a lot of converts. And then, of course, as I said earlier, we have it's timely that we begin to mount some legal challenges against some of these things that are being said and promoted by various groups. We need to clarify the record as it relates to what's being told, what the public has been told as it relates to really the truth about how those buildings came down.
What do you want to tell the audience, your view? Why is this so important? Why do we need to be focusing on this event that happened over a decade ago? What happens if we don't expose this?
Well, they'll just continue with their lies. And, one lie gets bigger, and if that passed, well, the next one will get bigger. And it's the erosion of our personal freedoms that are the end result. And the erosion of us as a society of laws and fairness and justice. These are serious issues. This isn't a matter if we don't know who, but someone planted explosives in those buildings. They deliberately murdered those people that were in the buildings. They had to have known that. And we're going to let murder go unpunished? These are really important personal and philosophical and questions for the entire population to come to grips with. These are our freedoms that are at risk.
Robert McCoy, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andy.
Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.